The July heat pressed against the windows of the Donovan Tower penthouse like an oppressive hand. Isabella Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead as she finished polishing the marble countertops in the kitchen. Even at 10 o'clock at night, the temperature hadn't dropped below 90 degrees, and the humidity made every breath feel like drowning. 26 years. Old and working as a live-in housekeeper for one of New York's wealthiest tech entrepreneurs wasn't exactly the dream Isabella had chased when she moved from Arizona 3 years ago. But Blake Donovan paid well, the work was steady, and she was saving every penny for culinary school. The fact that her employer was devastatingly handsome was just an unfortunate complication. She'd learned to ignore Blake Donovan, 34 years old, founder of Apex Technologies, worth an estimated $3 billion, and the most emotionally unavailable man Isabella had ever encountered. In the 8 months she'd worked for him, their conversations never extended beyond instructions about his schedule or preferences for dinner. He lived alone in this massive penthouse, worked 18-hour days, and seemed determined to avoid any genuine human connection. Isabella gathered the cleaning supplies and headed toward the service elevator that led to the staff quarters on the floor below. The moment the doors opened, a wall of heat hit her. The hallway was stifling, and she could already hear other staff members complaining. "The air conditioning is completely dead," Mrs. Chen, the building's head of housekeeping, announced grimly. "Maintenance says they can't fix it until morning. It's going to be a miserable night." Isabella trudged to her small room at the end of the corridor. Opening the door released a wave of trapped heat that made her dizzy. The tiny space, barely large enough for a twin bed and dresser, felt like an oven. The single window didn't open, and the emergency fan Mrs. Chen had distributed did nothing but push hot air around. She tried to sleep. Really tried. But after 2 hours of lying in sweat-soaked sheets, her skin sticky and uncomfortable, her mind drifting dangerously toward heat exhaustion, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. Blake was in Singapore for a week-long conference. She'd confirmed his travel itinerary herself that morning. The penthouse was empty. The master bedroom had floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a private terrace. A king-sized bed with luxury linens, and most importantly, perfectly functioning air conditioning, just for one night. He'd never know. Isabella crept back upstairs using her keycard, moving through the darkened penthouse like a ghost. Moonlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating the minimalist furniture and expensive artwork that Blake never seemed to appreciate. Everything was pristine, cold, untouched, like the man himself. The master suite took her breath away, even though she cleaned it twice a week. The room was enormous, decorated in shades of charcoal and cream, but it was the bed that drew her attention. It looked like something from a luxury hotel. Covered in high thread count sheets that probably cost more than her monthly salary, Isabella took a quick shower in the marble bathroom. Using the basic soap, rather than Blake's expensive products, she'd packed a nightgown, the only one she owned, a simple ivory silk slip that fell to mid-thigh. It had been a gift from her sister. Too nice to wear in her sweltering quarters. The moment she slid between those sheets, Isabella nearly moaned with relief. The fabric was impossibly soft, cool against her overheated skin. The air conditioning hummed quietly, keeping the temperature perfect. For the first time in hours, she could breathe. She told herself she'd set an alarm. Wake up before dawn and return to her quarters before anyone noticed. But exhaustion claimed her quickly, pulling her into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. Isabella never heard the private elevator arrive. Never heard the penthouse door open. Never heard Blake Donovan's frustrated sigh as he dropped his briefcase in the foyer. Blake loosened his tie as he walked through his home, bone-tired from a hellish day. The Singapore conference had been canceled at the last minute due to a typhoon warning. He'd spent 12 hours in airports and on planes, dealing with incompetent airline staff and his business, his partner's constant phone calls about rescheduling. All he wanted was a shower and his bed. He pushed open his bedroom door, already unbuttoning his shirt, and froze. There was someone in his bed. Blake's first instinct was alarm. Security breach. Intruder. But as his eyes adjusted to the moonlight streaming through the windows, recognition hit him like a physical blow. Isabella. His housekeeper was asleep in his bed. Dark hair spilled across his pillows, one arm curled beneath her head. She'd kicked off most of the covers, and the nightgown she wore had ridden up to reveal long, toned legs. The The silk clung to curves he'd deliberately trained himself not to notice. The neckline dipping low enough to make his mouth go dry. Blake should wake her. Should demand an explanation. Should be furious about this invasion of his privacy. Instead, he found himself unable to move, unable to look away, unable to think about anything except how right she looked there. How badly he wanted to climb into that bed beside her. How many nights he'd lain awake thinking about her, hating himself for being attracted to an employee. To someone so far outside the carefully controlled boundaries of his life, his hands clenched into fists. He'd spent 8 months maintaining professional distance, speaking to her only when necessary, refusing to acknowledge the way his heart raced when she smiled at the delivery guy or laughed with the other staff. He'd convinced himself he was protecting her from the disaster that was his personal life, from the emotional wasteland he'd become after his parents' deaths and his ex's betrayal. But seeing Isabella here, in his most private space, wearing almost nothing, and looking more beautiful than he'd ever allowed himself to acknowledge, every wall he'd built came crashing down. Isabella. His voice came out rougher than intended. She stirred but didn't wake. Blake moved closer, his body acting on instinct rather than logic. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, close enough to smell the vanilla scent of her shampoo, to see the flutter of her eyelashes, to notice the way her lips parted slightly as she breathed. "Isabella," he repeated, slightly louder. This time her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She blinked at the ceiling, then turned her head toward him. Blake watched awareness crash over her face. Her eyes went wide with shock. Her body went rigid, and a small gasp escaped her lips. "Mr. Donovan." She sat up so quickly she nearly hit him, clutching the sheet to her chest. "Oh my God, I thought you were in Singapore. The air conditioning broke downstairs and I couldn't sleep. I'm so sorry, this was so inappropriate. I'll leave right now." The words tumbled out in a panicked rush, her face flushed with embarrassment. Blake should agree. Should let her leave. Should pretend this never happened? Don't.
Ow!
The word came out before he could stop it. Isabella froze. Still holding the sheet against her, looking at him with those enormous brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for months. "What? Don't leave," Blake heard himself say, his voice low and intense. "Not yet, Mr. Donovan. I shouldn't be here. I know that. I just needed somewhere cool to sleep and I thought you were gone all week." Her voice shook. "Please don't fire me. I need this job. I'll go back downstairs right now and we can forget this ever happened. I don't want to forget." The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and electric. Isabella stared at him, her breathing quickening. "What are you saying?" Blake knew he should stop. Should let her go. Should maintain the professional boundaries that had kept them both safe. But he was tired of safe. Tired of lonely. Tired of pretending he didn't want her with every fiber of his being. "I'm saying that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day I hired you." His hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching out to tuck a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I'm saying that I've spent 8 months trying to convince myself that what I feel is just attraction that will fade. That keeping my distance is the right thing to do." Isabella's lips parted in shock, her eyes searching his face. "You've been thinking about me?" "Constantly." Blake's thumb traced her cheekbone, watching goosebumps rise on her skin. "Do you have any idea how difficult it's been? Watching you move through my home, hearing your laugh when you talk to the other staff, smelling your perfume lingering in rooms after you leave. It's been torture. You never even look at me," Isabella whispered, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "Because if I looked at you the way I wanted to, you'd see everything. And I can't be the employer who takes advantage of his housekeeper. I can't be that man." His voice was raw with honesty. "So I kept my distance. Told myself it was better this way. And now," the question was barely audible, "now you're in my bed, wearing almost nothing, and I'm completely out of reasons to stay away from you." Blake's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Tell me to leave, Isabella. Tell me this crosses too many lines and you want me to walk away. Because if you don't say it right now, I'm going to kiss you, and everything changes." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Isabella should say it, should protect herself, should remember that he was her employer, that this could destroy everything. That men like Blake Donovan didn't fall for housekeepers in real life. But looking into his eyes, seeing raw vulnerability in a man who showed the world nothing but ice, feeling the gentle touch of his hand against her face, Isabella couldn't make herself say the words that would send him away. "Don't leave," she whispered, echoing his earlier command. Blake's control shattered. He pulled her against him, his mouth crashing down on hers with 8 months of pent-up desire and frustration. The kiss was fierce and consuming, nothing gentle or tentative about it. Isabella gasped against his lips, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and Isabella's fingers tangled in his hair. The sheet fell away, forgotten, and Blake groaned at the feel of silk and warm skin beneath his hands. This was madness. This was everything he'd sworn he wouldn't do, and he couldn't bring himself to care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake pressed his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know," Isabella replied, her hand still gripped in his shirt. "We shouldn't do this, I know. I'm going to do it anyway." Blake pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes dark with desire, but also something deeper. "Unless you tell me to stop." "Right now, Isabella?" Last chance. She looked at him, at this impossible man who'd just admitted 2 months of wanting her, who was giving her the power to walk away, who was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered in his carefully ordered world. "Don't stop," Isabella breathed, and pulled him back down to her. The rest of the night became a blur of tangled sheets and whispered names and touches that set her skin on fire. Blake made love to her with an intensity that stole her breath, his hands and mouth learning every inch of her as if memorizing something precious. And when exhaustion finally claimed them both, Isabella fell asleep, wrapped in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For one perfect night, nothing else existed. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the bedroom in shades of gold and amber. Isabella woke slowly, her body deliciously sore, her mind fuzzy with sleep. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. Blake's bed, Blake's arms around her, Blake's mouth on hers, everything they'd done. Isabella's eyes flew open. The space beside her was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. Blake was gone. She sat up quickly, pulling the sheet around herself, and spotted him standing on the terrace with his back to her. He was already dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, phone pressed to his ear. His posture rigid and professional. The man from last night, vulnerable and passionate and desperate for her, had disappeared. In his place stood Blake Donovan, billionaire entrepreneur, untouchable and remote. Isabella's stomach twisted with dread. She gathered her nightgown from where it had been discarded on the floor and slipped it on with shaking hands. She should leave before he came back inside. Should disappear to her quarters and pretend this never happened. But her legs felt unsteady, and she couldn't seem to make herself move. Blake ended his call and turned. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a heartbeat, Isabella saw something flicker in his expression. Heat. Longing. But it vanished. So quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind him with careful precision. The silence between them felt suffocating. "Good morning," Isabella said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Morning." Blake's tone was clipped, professional. He wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "I have a conference call in 20 minutes, of course." Isabella stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should go, Isabella." He stopped her as she moved toward the door. She turned back, hope fluttering dangerously in her chest. Blake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. Last night was a mistake. The words hit like a slap. Isabella felt her face go hot, then cold. A mistake. Yes. Blake's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on a point past her shoulder. "You work for me. There's a significant power imbalance. What happened shouldn't have happened." "You said you'd been thinking about me for months," Isabella said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You said you couldn't stay away." I was wrong to say those things. His voice was flat, emotionless. "I took advantage of the situation. It won't happen again." Humiliation burned through Isabella's veins, mixing with anger and hurt. "You didn't take advantage of anything. I wanted it to. I made my own choice." A choice influenced by the fact that I'm your employer and you need this job. Blake finally looked at her, and his expression was so cold, it made her flinch. Let's not pretend this was anything more than what it was. Physical attraction. A moment of weakness. We're both adults. We can move past it. Move past it, Isabella repeated numbly. I expect you to continue your duties as normal. What happened between us stays private. Do you understand? The clinical way he spoke, as if discussing a business transaction rather than the night they'd shared, made Isabella want to scream, or cry, or both. Instead, she lifted her chin and forced herself to meet his gaze directly. Perfectly clear, Mr. Donovan? She made his name sound like an insult. It was just sex. A mistake. I'll make sure it doesn't interfere with my work. Something flickered in his eyes again, but Isabella didn't wait to see what it was. She turned and walked out of his bedroom with as much dignity as she could muster, refusing to run, even though every instinct screamed at her to flee. She made it to her quarters before the tears came. The next week was torture. Isabella threw herself into her work, maintaining perfect professionalism whenever she encountered Blake. She cleaned his penthouse with meticulous care, prepared his meals exactly as he liked them, and spoke to him only when absolutely necessary. And she felt his eyes on her constantly. Every time she entered a room, she could feel his gaze tracking her movements. When she served his breakfast, she noticed the way his hands clenched around his coffee cup. When she walked past his office, she caught him staring before he quickly looked away. Blake Donovan might claim last night was a mistake, but his body language told a different story. Isabella tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her work and her savings and her plans for culinary school, but it was impossible to forget the way he'd touched her, the things he'd whispered in the dark, the vulnerability she'd seen in his eyes. On Thursday afternoon, everything came to a head. Isabella was in the lobby, signing for a delivery package, when Ryan Torres, the building's head of security, stopped to chat. Ryan was 28, friendly, with an easy smile that reminded Isabella of her brother. They'd become casual friends over the past months, occasionally grabbing coffee together during breaks. Hey, Isabella, Ryan said, leaning against the reception desk. Some of us are going out for drinks tomorrow night after shift. You should come. You've seemed stressed lately. A night out might help. Isabella smiled, grateful for the invitation and the normalcy of it. That actually sounds great. Where are you thinking? There's a new place in Tribeca. Great music, good drinks, not too expensive. Ryan's smile widened. And if I'm being honest, I'd really like to spend more time with you outside of work. Maybe we could grab dinner first? Just the two of us? Before Isabella could respond, a cold voice cut through the conversation. Torres. Ow! Both Isabella and Ryan turned to find Blake standing near the elevators, his expression thunderous. He was staring at Ryan like he wanted to tear him apart. Mr. Donovan. Ryan straightened immediately, his professional demeanor snapping into place. Sir, I was just speaking with Isabella about the new security protocols for the service entrance. It didn't sound like you were discussing security protocols. Blake's voice was dangerously quiet. It sounded like you were asking my employee out on a date. Ryan's face paled slightly. Sir, I meant no disrespect. Isabella and I are friends, and I thought you thought wrong. Blake stepped closer, and despite being slightly shorter than Ryan, his presence was intimidating. Ms. Martinez's personal time is her own business. However, fraternization between building staff during work hours is unprofessional. I suggest you return to your duties. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Ryan nodded stiffly, shot Isabella an apologetic look, and walked away quickly. The lobby fell silent except for the quiet hum of the elevator and the clicking of the receptionist's keyboard. Isabella stared at Blake, shock giving way to fury. What was that? A conversation about professional boundaries, Blake said coolly. Something you clearly need reminding about. Professional boundaries? Isabella's voice rose despite her best efforts to control it. You just humiliated Ryan for asking me to drinks. That has nothing to do with professional boundaries and everything to do with you being jealous. I'm not jealous. The muscle in Blake's jaw twitched. I'm maintaining appropriate workplace standards. You're a liar. The words came out before Isabella could stop them. The receptionist's typing stopped. Blake's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "My office," he said quietly. Now, Isabella wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him exactly where he could shove his orders, but she was still his employee, and they were attracting attention. She followed him to the private elevator, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The ride to the penthouse was silent and suffocating. Blake stood on the opposite side of the elevator, radiating tension. Isabella could see his reflection in the polished doors, the tight set of his shoulders. The way his hands kept flexing and releasing. The moment they stepped into the penthouse, Isabella whirled on him. "You had no right to speak to Ryan that way. He was being friendly, and you acted like he committed a crime. He was flirting with you." Blake's control was starting to crack, his voice rising. In the middle of the lobby, where anyone could see. "So what if he was? I'm single. I can accept invitations from whoever I want." Isabella stepped closer, her anger overriding her common sense. "Or did you think that sleeping with you once means you own me now?" "I don't think I own you," Blake bit out. "Then why do you care if Ryan asks me out? Why do you care if I go for drinks with him or anyone else?" Isabella demanded. "You made it very clear that what happened between us was a mistake, that it meant nothing. So why does it matter what I do with my personal life?" Because Blake stopped abruptly, turning away from her. His hands gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles went white. "Because what?" Isabella pushed, moving around to face him. "Say it, Blake. Be honest for once instead of hiding behind your walls, because I can't stand the thought of his hands on you." The words exploded out of him, raw and furious. "Because the idea of you smiling at him the way you smiled at me that night makes me want to destroy something. Because I've spent the last week trying to convince myself I did the right thing by pushing you away, and seeing you with him made me realize I'm failing miserably." Isabella's breath caught. "You said it was a mistake. I lied." Blake's eyes met hers, and the emotion in them made her dizzy. It was the furthest thing from a mistake. It was the only real thing that's happened to me in years. And it terrified me. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Because you matter." Blake moved closer, his voice dropping. "Because I don't do relationships. I don't do feelings. I've spent years building walls to protect myself from exactly this. And then you showed up in my bed, and every defense I had just crumbled." "So you decided to hurt me first," Isabella said, understanding dawning. "Before I could hurt you?" Blake flinched as if she'd struck him. "Yes, that's not fair. I know." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve another chance. But Isabella, I'm asking anyway. Because this past week without you has been hell. Because I can't focus on anything except you. Because the thought of you with someone else is driving me insane." "You're jealous," Isabella said again. But this time it wasn't an accusation. Completely, Blake's thumb stroked her cheekbone. "Irrationally. Possessively jealous. I want you to be mine and only mine, and I have absolutely no right to ask for that." Isabella should walk away, should protect her heart from a man who'd already proven he could hurt her. But looking into Blake's eyes, seeing the vulnerability and desperation there, she found herself saying, "Then earn the right." Blake blinked. "What? If you want me, really want me, then prove it." Isabella placed her hand over his, still cupping her face. "No more running away when things get real. No more calling what we have a mistake. No more hiding." "I don't know how to do this," Blake admitted, his voice rough. "I don't know how to be in a relationship. How to let someone in, then we'll figure it out together." Isabella turned her head, pressing a kiss to his palm. "But I need honesty, Blake. I need you to stop protecting yourself by hurting me. I swear I'll try." He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. "God, Isabella, I've missed you. I've missed this. It's been a week," she said, but she was holding him just as tightly. "Longest week of my life." Blake pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "Can we start over? Do this right." "I don't want to start over." Isabella slid her hands up his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. "I want to move forward. From here. Broken parts and all." Blake kissed her then, and it was different from their first kiss. Slower, deeper, full of promise instead of just passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. I'm going to mess this up sometimes, he warned. Probably, Isabella agreed. And I'll call you on it every single time. Blake laughed, the sound rusty, as if he didn't do it often. I believe you will. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Really talking, for the first time. Blake told her about his parents' death in a car accident 5 years ago. How he'd thrown himself into work to avoid dealing with the grief. How his ex-fiancée had only wanted him for his money and status, leaving him unable to trust anyone's motives. How he'd convinced himself that staying alone was safer than risking that kind of betrayal again. Isabella told him about growing up poor in Arizona. About her dreams of becoming a chef. About taking this job because it paid better than any restaurant position and came with room and board. About feeling invisible most of her life, until that night in his bed, when he'd looked at her like she was the most important person in the world, as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Blake pulled Isabella close on the terrace. This is going to be complicated, he said quietly. People will judge. They'll say you're with me for money. They'll question every aspect of our relationship. Let them. Isabella turned in his arms to face him. I know why I'm here. And as long as you know too, nothing else matters. Blake kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. Stay tonight. And tomorrow night? And every night after that? Move your things up here. Be with me properly. It's moving pretty fast, Isabella teased, though her heart was soaring. I've wasted enough time already. Blake's arms tightened around her. I don't want to waste another minute. 3 months passed in a bubble of happiness that Isabella had never imagined possible. She moved into Blake's penthouse, her small collection of belongings looking lost in the enormous master closet he'd cleared for her. They navigated the strange new dynamic of being both employer and lover, eventually deciding that Isabella would transition to a different role in Blake's company, working in the hospitality division where she could use her culinary knowledge without the ethical complications. Blake was different when he let his guard down. He laughed more, smiled at random moments, held her hand under the table during business dinners. He was still learning how to be in a relationship, sometimes retreating into work when emotions got too intense, but he always came back and talked it through. Isabella discovered that beneath his cold exterior was a man who was deeply passionate about his work, fiercely loyal to the few people he trusted, and surprisingly tender in private moments. He supported her culinary school applications, helped her create a business plan for the restaurant she dreamed of opening someday, and listened with genuine interest when she talked about her family. They kept the relationship relatively private at first, but it was impossible to hide completely. Staff whispered, business associates noticed, and inevitably, word reached the wrong person, Vanessa Sterling. Blake's ex-fiancée was everything Isabella wasn't. Right. Old money, Ivy League educated, connected to New York's most powerful families. She'd broken off their engagement 2 years ago when she'd found someone with even more wealth and status. But apparently, seeing Blake happy with someone else was unacceptable. Isabella first encountered Vanessa on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd stopped by Blake's office to bring him lunch, a habit they'd developed. His assistant waved her through with a smile, but when Isabella opened the office door, she found Blake wasn't alone. A stunning blonde in a designer suit sat on the edge of his desk, her body language intimate and proprietary. She looked up when Isabella entered, her blue eyes cold and assessing. Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You must be the housekeeper. Blake stood immediately. Vanessa, what are you doing here? I came to discuss the merger, darling. Vanessa didn't move from her perch on his desk. Sterling Industries and Apex Technologies would be unstoppable together. You know, it makes sense. We've had this conversation. I'm not interested. Blake moved around the desk, positioning himself between Vanessa and Isabella. And I didn't invite you here. Your assistant let me in. I assumed you'd want to see me. Vanessa's smile was sharp. We have so much history, after all. Isabella set the lunch bag on the side table, feeling completely out of place. This woman belonged in Blake's world in a way Isabella never would. Vanessa wore confidence like armor, spoke the language of business and old money, moved through these spaces with the ease of someone who'd been groomed for them since birth. I should go, Isabella said quietly. No. Blake's hand caught hers, pulling her to his side. Vanessa was just leaving, was I? Vanessa's eyes narrowed as she looked at their joined hands. Blake, Surely you're not serious about this. She's your employee. It's embarrassing. She's my girlfriend, Blake said firmly. And you need to leave. Now. Vanessa slid off the desk with predatory grace. As she passed Isabella, she leaned in close enough that only Isabella could hear. He'll get bored. Men like Blake always do. And when he does, you'll go back to cleaning toilets, and I'll still be here. Then she was gone. Leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and poison in her wake, Blake pulled Isabella into his arms immediately. Don't listen to her. She's bitter and vindictive. She's right, though, Isabella said, her voice muffled against his chest. I don't belong in your world, Blake. I don't know how to talk to those people, how to act at your business dinners, how to be what you need. You're exactly what I need. Blake tilted her face up to his. Everything else is just noise. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa's presence became impossible to ignore. She showed up at business events Blake attended, always perfectly dressed, always saying just the right thing to the right people. She made pointed comments about the merger, about how perfect she and Blake had been together, about the future they could still have. And she made sure. Isabella overheard conversations about how inappropriate their relationship was, how Blake was risking his reputation, how everyone was wondering when he'd come to his senses. Isabella tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her relationship with Blake and the plans they were making together. But doubt grew like poison ivy, wrapping around her confidence and choking it slowly. Things came to a breaking point on a Friday evening. Blake had a conference call scheduled with international investors. Isabella was in the living room, working on culinary school applications. When she heard his voice from the office, Vanessa, I've told you repeatedly, I'm not interested in the merger or in rekindling anything personal. There was a pause as he listened. That's not your concern. My relationship with Isabella is private. Another pause. Isabella's hand stilled on her laptop. I understand the board's concerns, but my personal life doesn't affect my business decisions. Blake's voice was tight with frustration. The Sterling merger isn't happening regardless of who I'm dating. Silence. Then, I need to think about it. Give me until Monday. Isabella's blood went cold. Think about what? The merger, Vanessa? Their relationship? When Blake emerged from his office 20 minutes later, Isabella was still sitting in the same spot. Staring at her laptop without seeing it, Blake said, dropping onto the couch beside her and pulling her close. Sorry that took so long. Investors are being difficult about the Tokyo expansion. Isabella didn't respond immediately. Finally, she said, I heard part of your call with Vanessa. Blake stiffened. Isabella, what do you need to think about until Monday? She pulled away to look at him. What decision are you making? It's not what you think. Blake ran a hand through his hair. Vanessa's been pushing this merger angle hard. She got to several board members, convinced them it's a smart business move. Now they're pressuring me to reconsider. And are you? Isabella's voice was small. Reconsidering? The merger would be beneficial from a purely financial standpoint, Blake admitted. It would expand our reach significantly. But it comes with strings. Vanessa has made it clear that business and personal are tied together for her. She wants you back. Yes. Blake met her eyes directly. And she's willing to use every manipulation tactic she knows to make it happen, including threatening to tank the deal and damage Apex's relationship with Sterling Industries if I don't agree to at least have dinner with her and discuss possibilities. Isabella felt something crack inside her chest. So you're going to have dinner with her? I'm considering it. Purely as a business meeting. Blake reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Isabella, it doesn't mean anything. It means something to her. And it means something to me. Isabella stood, needing distance. Blake, I can't compete with her. I can't offer you business mergers, or connections, or any of the things someone like Vanessa can. All I have is myself. And if that's not enough, it is enough. Blake interrupted fiercely, standing to face her. You are enough. More than enough. Then why are you even considering having dinner with her? Isabella's voice broke. Why are you letting her manipulate you like this? Because I have responsibilities? Blake's frustration boiled over. I have a board to answer to. Employees depending on this company's success. Investors who expect me to make smart business decisions. I can't just ignore all of that because my ex is being manipulative. No, but you can tell her to go to hell. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself. You can choose me over a business deal. Unless I'm not worth that, that's not fair. None of this is fair. Isabella's voice rose. I'm trying, Blake. I'm trying so hard to fit into your world, to be enough to not let people like Vanessa make me feel small. But you having dinner with her, considering her proposal, it makes me feel like I'm just temporary. Like I'm something you're enjoying until you go back to your real life. You are my real life, Blake said, but he didn't reach for her again. The silence between them was painful. Finally, Isabella made a decision. I think I need some space, she said quietly. Just for a few days. To think. Isabella, don't do this. You need to make a decision about Vanessa and the merger. I need to figure out if I can actually do this long term. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I love you, Blake, but I can't spend my life wondering if I'm enough or waiting for you to choose business over me. I'm not choosing business over you, Blake said desperately. Then prove it. Isabella grabbed her jacket from the closet. Monday. Make your decision about Vanessa and the merger, and I'll make mine about us. She left before he could respond, before she could see the devastation on his face. Before her resolve could crumble, Isabella spent the weekend at her sister's apartment in Brooklyn, crying and second-guessing everything. Her sister Maria listened patiently and then gave her hard truth. The question isn't whether Blake's world is too big for you, Maria said firmly. It's whether Blake is willing to make you part of that world for real, not just hide you away in his penthouse like a secret. And whether you're willing to claim your space in his life, instead of letting people like Vanessa make you feel like you don't belong. Isabella knew her sister was right. She'd been so focused on her own insecurities that she hadn't demanded what she actually needed from Blake. Commitment, public acknowledgement, a real partnership where they faced challenges together instead of letting outside pressure drive them apart. Monday morning, Isabella returned to the penthouse to find it empty. Blake had left early for the office, according to the note on the counter. He'd also left her a key card to his private office and a message, "Please come at noon. I need you there." Isabella's stomach churned with anxiety as she rode the elevator to Apex Technologies' executive floor. Blake's assistant smiled at her warmly and gestured to the conference room instead of his office. "He's in there with the board," she said. "He asked me to send you in when you arrived." "The board?" Isabella's anxiety spiked. What was Blake doing? She pushed open the conference room door to find a long table filled with serious-looking men and women in expensive suits. Blake stood at the head of the table, and beside him, wearing a triumphant smile, sat Vanessa Sterling. Isabella's heart sank. He'd chosen the merger, but then Blake saw her, and his entire face transformed. He smiled, genuine and relieved, and held out his hand to her. "Isabella, thank you for coming," he addressed the room. "Everyone, this is Isabella Martinez, my girlfriend and the woman I'm going to marry." The room erupted. Vanessa's face went white with shock and rage. Several board members began talking at once. Isabella stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what Blake had just said. Blake ignored all of it. Walking over to take her hand and pull her into the room, "I know we haven't discussed this officially, and I promise I'll propose properly later with a ring and everything. But I needed everyone here to understand exactly where I stand." Turned back to the board and Vanessa. "The Sterling merger is off the table. Permanently, Vanessa. Your attempts to manipulate me into a relationship by using business pressure were inappropriate and unprofessional. Any future business between our companies will go through proper channels and will have nothing to do with my personal life." "Blake, you're making a mistake," Vanessa hissed. "The board agrees that this merger is in the company's best interest." "Then the board can vote me out," Blake said calmly. "But I won't compromise my relationship or my integrity for a business deal. There are other ways to expand Apex's reach that don't involve tying myself to someone who views relationships as transactions." He looked at Isabella, his eyes soft, despite the tension in the room. "I spent 3 months falling in love with this woman. She's brilliant, compassionate, and brave enough to call me on my behavior when I'm being an idiot. She challenges me to be better. She makes me want to be better. And I will not hide her or apologize for choosing her." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face. Blake squeezed her hand. "So here's what's going to happen," Blake continued, addressing the board. "Isabella and I are together, permanently. She'll be attending all company events as my partner. When we get married, she'll be my wife and part of this company's future. Anyone who has a problem with that can tender their resignation today." The room was silent. Finally, one of the older board members, a woman named Catherine Winters, smiled slightly. "I think I speak for most of us when I say we're more interested in your leadership and vision than your personal life. Blake, the Vanessa situation made things complicated. This clarity is welcome." Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're choosing a housekeeper over a billion-dollar merger?" "I'm choosing the woman I love over a manipulative business deal," Blake corrected. "There's a difference. Goodbye, Vanessa." Vanessa looked between Blake and Isabella with pure venom, then stormed out of the conference room. The tension broke immediately. Several board members actually chuckled. Catherine Winters stood and extended her hand to Isabella. "Welcome to the madness," she said warmly. "If you can handle Blake Donovan's personality, you can handle anything we throw at you." The meeting dissolved into discussions of alternative expansion plans. Blake pulled Isabella aside into his private office as soon as they could escape. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I'm sorry I made you doubt for even a second that you're my priority. I was trying to handle Vanessa tactfully, trying to minimize the drama. But you were right. I should have shut her down completely from the start." "Told the entire board you want to marry me?" Isabella said, still trying to process everything.
I do.
Blake cupped her face in his hands. "I know it's fast. I know we still have things to figure out, but Isabella, you asked me to prove that you matter more than business. That's my proof. I just chose you in front of everyone who matters professionally. I'll choose you every single time." "The board could have revolted," Isabella pointed out. "You could have lost everything. Then I would have built something new. With you," Blake kissed her softly. "Nothing is worth more than this, than us. I finally understand that." Isabella wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him close. "I love you. And yes, what? Yes, I'll marry you. Eventually. When you propose properly." She smiled through her tears. "But I'm saying yes now, so you know where I stand too." Blake laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down and kissed her until they were both breathless. "I'm going to make mistakes," he warned, echoing words from months ago. "I'm going to get absorbed in work sometimes. I'm going to struggle with being vulnerable. I'm going to call you on it," Isabella promised. "Every single time. Because we're partners now, Blake." "Really partners?" "Partners," Blake agreed. "In everything. The next 6 months were a whirlwind." Blake did propose properly. On the anniversary of the night Isabella had fallen asleep in his bed, he took her back to the penthouse, which he'd filled with candles and flowers, and got down on one knee with a ring that took her breath away. The media had a field day with their engagement. Headlines ranged from romantic to skeptical to outright cruel. But Blake and Isabella faced it together. They gave one carefully crafted interview to a major business publication, telling their story on their own terms, and then refused to engage with the gossip. Isabella started culinary school and discovered she loved it even more than she'd imagined. Blake attended her presentations and taste tests, offering honest feedback and genuine enthusiasm. They began discussing plans for the restaurant she wanted to open, with Blake offering to invest not as her wealthy fiancé, but as a business partner who believed in her vision. They learned each other's rhythms. Isabella learned when Blake needed space to process versus when he was retreating behind walls. Blake learned how to communicate his feelings instead of shutting down. They fought sometimes, passionately and honestly, but they always worked through it, and they laughed. God, they laughed so much. On a crisp October evening, Blake and Isabella stood on the penthouse terrace, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun set over Manhattan. Isabella wore his shirt and nothing else, her hair messy from an afternoon spent in bed. Blake wore sweatpants, his usual armor of suits and formality completely abandoned. "What are you thinking about?" Isabella asked, noticing the small smile on his face. "About a year ago," Blake said softly, "when I walked into my bedroom and found you asleep in my bed, I thought my world was ending. Thought I was losing control. And now, I realize it wasn't ending. It was finally beginning." Blake turned her in his arms to face him, his eyes full of love and certainty. "You saved me, Isabella. From a life of loneliness and fear. You made me believe in happiness again." "Saved each other," Isabella corrected, touching her forehead to his. "I was invisible before you. You made me see my own worth." Blake kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, he smiled. You know, we still never fixed the air conditioning in the staff quarters. Isabella laughed. Are you suggesting we keep it broken? I'm suggesting that the best thing that ever happened to me started because you were too hot to sleep. Nate grinned. Seems like we owe a lot to that broken air conditioner. We should probably send it a thank you card. Isabella teased. Or name our first kid after it. We are not naming our child Air Conditioner Donovan, AC for short. Isabella swatted his arm, laughing. Blake caught her hand and pulled her close again, his expression turning serious. Thank you, he said quietly, for taking a chance on me. For seeing past the walls. For loving me anyway, always Isabella promised. From that first night until forever. They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Two people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way and built something real from that impossible beginning. The housekeeper and the billionaire. The woman who'd dared to sleep in the wrong bed. And the man who'd found everything he needed there. The city sparkled below them, full of possibility and promise, as they held each other close and dreamed of the future they'd build together. A future of love, partnership, and the kind of happiness that only comes from being brave enough to be vulnerable. Honest enough to fight for what matters, and wise enough to know that sometimes the best things in life start with a single reckless decision on a hot summer night.